All right, welcome back, everybody. We hope you enjoyed that wonderful lunch break and our Ask the Docs in between. So our next presenter, we went back and asked, based on some things that we see online and questions people ask, and said, you know, we really need to understand this nutrition piece of HypoPARA, calcium, and all that as well. So we were able to find somebody that comes to us from the NIH, and we talked to her. We had a pre-meeting and talked to her about what our needs are and the different things that are that we need on a daily basis to be able to partner with our supplements as well. And I tell you, she sent over her presentation, and I was like, wow, it's amazing the people listening to me out there and the presentations they're coming up with, because it's really, I think you'll really enjoy the concepts. I'm not going to give it away. She'll be able to share with you, and I think you'll make your own deductions from it. But we're excited to welcome to the table Megan Schoenfeld. She's from the NIH, and she provides clinical services and resources to the NIH team. So welcome, Megan.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi. Awesome. I'm so happy to be here. I've been at the NIH for 10 years, and some people look familiar in the audience, actually. My clinical interests are endocrine diseases. I support the endocrinologists at NIH with clinical nutrition services, and then I support research, helping providers and investigators collect data on nutrition. And I'm also interested in diabetes and weight management, liver disease, and I think nutrition can sometimes seem overwhelming, so my goal is to always make it as clear and as realistic as possible. So that is the focus on my presentation today, is to make it as user-friendly as able. Okay, so here's an outline of what I was going to go over today based on some of the feedback I received that people are interested in, but then there will be time for questions as well. So we'll go through calcium needs, foods that contain calcium, calcium supplements, other nutrients of concern that people with HypoPARA are worried about, general healthy diet recommendations, activity, some sample meal plans that I came up with, and some resources. All right, so starting out with calcium, our favorite. Calcium is the most abundant mineral in the body. It is essential for building and maintaining bone health, or bones and teeth, helping us clot blood, regulating our central nervous system, and keeping our muscles working properly. So it does so many things for us. It is found in many foods like dairy products. Naturally occurring in dairy products is added to others like calcium fortified orange juice or plant-based milks. It is present in some medications like Tums for acid reflux, and it is available as a dietary supplement, which you guys know. And that can be calcium carbonate, calcium citrate. It's stored mostly in our bones, and so throughout our lifetime, our body is pulling calcium it needs from the bones if our blood levels are too low, and over time, if this is happening too much, our bones can become weak. So that's why calcium is important. And then the recommended daily allowance, or the RDA, for adults is generally 1,000 to 1,200, depending on age and gender. Can be as high as 1,300 for young adolescents. And then the food labels, are interesting enough, is based on 1,300. So when you're reading a food label, we'll go over this a little bit, it's based on 1,300. And then calcium is a large mineral, so it's not always easy to break down in the gut. All right, so calcium sources. That should have an S at the end. Despite having probably about 7 people reviewed the slides, there's an S missing on sources. So dairy sources, we've got milk, yogurt, cheese. These are the most, some of the richest calcium sources. But that doesn't mean they're our only sources. We've got our non-dairy sources as well. They could be fortified non-dairy milk, tofu, and soybeans. Almonds, green leafy vegetables like spinach, greens, broccoli, bok choy. Fortified breakfast cereals have some calcium added to them. Fish that contain bones, so if you're a sardine eater, go ahead, that's a great calcium source. Not for me. And then fortified orange juice. All right. Okay, so here's a table. This is from the dietary guidelines. I just screenshotted this table. There's a million calcium tables out there, and that's what can be somewhat frustrating is sometimes you find different milligram amounts depending on where your source is. But this is a great one. It goes through dairy and the fortified plant-based milk alternatives, and then some of the vegetable protein and fruits. So remember, the RDA is based on is typically 1,000 to 1,200, and food labels have the 13. And then there's a link to this table. So things that are interesting on here, I think, are, a lot of the greens are based on cooked. So when you're thinking about the portion that you need to get, say, about 100 from your greens, like turnip greens or something, it's based on cooked. And then tofu is another one that I find a lot of diversity in the amount of calcium. So checking your food label on your tofu if you're a tofu eater. So now on to food labels. So this can be a great way to get your information about calcium. So the new food label will display the milligrams of calcium in the product, which is something in the past 10 years that has changed since I started working with individuals with HypoPARA. It used to be you just got the percentage, and then you had to know what the percentage was based off of to come up with how many milligrams of calcium. But now, thankfully, someone's looking out for us, and we've got the milligrams of calcium on most food labels. Say you found a product that doesn't have it, it is based on 1,300. So what you would do is say it's a 15% calcium, then you would take 1,300 times 0.15 to come up with the milligrams that item is providing. All right, so many individuals with HypoPARA are just told to, go out, increase your calcium, just get more calcium. Do it. It should be easy. But I find sometimes it's not as easy as it sounds like it should be. So here's some of my favorite ways to kind of start thinking about getting more calcium. Again, you guys are probably more so an expert in calcium than me, but these are just kind of typical things that I'm telling people. So maybe start the day with calcium. So the day is fresh, let's get some calcium. It could be a glass of milk, both dairy or non-dairy. You could think about putting milk in your coffee or making a latte instead of just coffee with sugar or black coffee. If you're not a milk drinker, you could think about fortified orange juice. If you like orange juice, that can be a great way to start the day. Yogurt, either dairy yogurt or non-dairy yogurt. If it is a non-dairy yogurt, I'd want you to look at the label and just make sure it's something that's got calcium added to it. And then adding cheese to eggs or toast can be a good idea too if you like cheese. So I know these are kind of dairy-focused recommendations, but fortified orange juice, plant-based milks, and plant-based yogurts could be options too. And then maybe having one calcium-containing snack. So thinking about keeping a small snack, whether it's a cheese stick, a yogurt, almonds, and even maybe like a small portion of fortified calcium cereal and some milk could be a good afternoon snack. And then a lot of times people ask, I want to increase my calcium, but I don't want to increase my calories. I want to be mindful of keeping my weight at a healthy range for myself. And these are some of the lowest calorie ways to increase calcium. So almond milk is a very low calorie beverage that is calcium fortified if you like it. So that can be an option. Green leafy vegetables, really making sure you're getting a lot of those can be a good idea. Tofu can be a low calorie protein source and also a great calcium source. Low fat cheese, fat-free milk, or yogurt could also be a great option. You can of course have full fat dairy if you'd like, but if you're thinking about reducing calories in some way, sometimes addressing the fat in dairy can be a good idea. All right. So moving on to supplements. So here are two supplement options. Moving into this, you obviously want to work with your provider to come up with how much calcium you should take, and they may recommend, either calcium carbonate or citrate, and how many milligrams you should take based on your usual intake. Looking at labs, of course, and then medical history. So calcium carbonate is 40% elemental calcium. It's best absorbed with food, and so we encourage you to take it with food. When you look at the food label, you can see on there, a lot of times it'll have the milligrams of calcium for you and the percent daily value. That milligram amount is the elemental amount. So say your physician told you to get 12 1,200 per day from supplemental calcium. You could do 1 calcium carbonate in the morning and 1 calcium carbonate in the evening. Of course, check with your physician before you start supplements or your dietitian as well. And then calcium citrate can be absorbed without food. It does not need acid, or it doesn't interact with acid as much, and it is smaller. So it's only 21% elemental calcium. So if you notice on this, for this example, to get 600 milligrams of calcium citrate, you would have to take 4 capsules versus just taking 1 of the calcium carbonate. So there's definitely benefits of either one, and just talking with your physician about which one is best for you. Oh, I had another tip on there, a little note on there that also talked about vitamin D. Some calcium supplements have vitamin D added to them, so you can also get recommendations on that as well. Calcium absorption, I think, can be kind of tricky. This is another question I get is, so the amount of calcium absorbed and used in our body is called calcium bioavailability. Dairy products in general have the highest amount of calcium and moderate amount of bioavailability, making them a good choice if you tolerate them or choose to eat them. Some non-dairy items with high bioavailability and good calcium content are like bok choy, tofu, and calcium-fortified orange juice. So these can be great options for a plant-based eater. And we count calcium based on milligrams present in that item versus the bioavailability. It would get a little stressful to try to come up with the bioavailability for everything and put it on the label. So several factors also impact calcium absorption, including the amount of calcium consumed at that time from either food or supplements, our age, and then compounds found in plants like oxalates. So we know that in large servings of calcium, say over 500 milligrams, that calcium absorption can decrease. And then as we age, we experience pH changes in our gut, and that can also impact calcium absorption. And then oxalates, which are present in plants, they can impact calcium absorption. They bind to calcium in our stomach and intestines and prevent that absorption. So foods, and oxalates are very healthy foods: spinach, sweet potatoes, soy, nuts, chocolate. These are many healthy foods that I want everyone to eat if they like them. And so I think it's really hard to try to figure out what to do about this. So what I usually recommend is to think about, if this is something that concerns you, if you eat a lot of these foods, maybe thinking about just picking one a day to have. So maybe you wouldn't have a day that was, where you had spinach and sweet potatoes and something in the same meal. Maybe you'd pick one or the other, so that you're still getting these healthy foods, maybe not in excessive amounts. I think it's hard because a lot of times HypoPARA can feel uncontrollable, and so you try to focus on what you can control, and a lot of times diet takes the hit for that. And we try to control our diet as much as we can. Never want people to feel super stressed about their diets, or for it to be a source of anxiety. So I think the bottom line is to try to do the best you can. You really can't control your age. You cannot control a lot of your own body's absorption. And so thinking about eating a variety of calcium sources, anything from dairy if you tolerate and like it, to plant-based, to some of the lower calcium sources like nuts and greens, and then in moderate amounts throughout the day. So I don't want to try to get all your 1,300 milligrams of calcium in the morning. Thinking about breaking it up throughout the day. I think that's the best we can do. All right, so phosphorus is another nutrient that comes up, and it's also impacted by PTH, and it can result in increased levels in the blood. So some individuals may receive recommendations to reduce phosphorus, and these are based on blood levels. We don't want people to reduce phosphorus without being, unnecessarily, because a lot of the foods that are high in phosphorus are protein sources and calcium sources. So these can include dairy, animal proteins, whole grains, beans, nuts. So these are healthy foods. I want people to have them if they can. And then phosphoric acid is added to food as a preservative. So that we may find in like soda, lunch meats, fast foods, processed foods. So if you have been told to follow a low-phos diet, here are some of my kind of 3 things to start with. I would start with omitting the empty calorie kind of processed foods. So say you are okay not eating lunch meat, and you can swap it for something that's not processed, maybe like chicken breast, or even like canned tuna would not have phosphoric acid added. Say you can find a soda without phosphoric acid, something clear or a sparkling item, or being careful with packaged baked goods. So these are foods that generally, we can find a substitute for. Things that you'll see on the label are these three additives, so looking for those. If you're flipping over a processed food and you're like, I really love this, let's make sure it doesn't have this in it if I'm trying to be careful of phosphorus. And then controlled protein portions can also be a good tip. So generally 3 to 4 ounces can still meet our protein needs. And since protein, especially animal protein, is such a rich source of phosphorus, being careful of the portion can be a good idea. And then consider plant-based dairy that doesn't have added phosphates. So this could be like soy milk or almond milk. If you have concerns about phosphorus in your blood, discuss it with your physician or dietitian before making changes that are unnecessary if your phosphorus levels are just fine. And then next is sodium. So sodium is another important mineral. And sodium and calcium are great friends in our body. When sodium intake is too high, the body gets rid of it through our urine, and it will drag calcium along with it. So sometimes lowering sodium intake can lower urine calcium losses. So say your physician has recommended, let's tighten up sodium a little bit and see if that helps with urinary calcium losses. Just know sodium is found in salt, and salt is added to food for flavor or preservation. The dietary guidelines suggest keeping sodium intake to less than 2,300 milligrams a day. That's quite hard. The general US population eats about 3,400 milligrams of sodium per day, and salt is kind of delicious, so it just happens. According to the CDC, about 40% of the sodium consumed by Americans comes from, many of my favorite foods: tacos, pasta, burgers, omelets, chicken dishes, pizza, burritos, yum. So some of these are dairy, some of these are calcium sources. And a lot of these, what I know from this is a lot of these are foods that can be purchased out. So I think that's a lot of where it comes from too, is a restaurant adding more sodium than you would at home. So say you are, thinking about wanting to eat these foods, but in a healthier way, maybe preparing them at home could be a good idea. But here are kind of my top 4 low sodium recommendations. So again, just like the phosphorus, start with the processed foods. Is there a purpose to it? There are many foods that are purposefully processed. And I feel like we get a lot of, information about processed foods. And so canned beans is an example I like to use. I don't make beans from dry at home. I don't have time for that. So I buy canned beans. And that's a processed food. But something like chips, which I also love, are not as purposeful as the beans. The beans are a protein source, they're a fiber source, the chips are just delightful. So thinking about, what, do I need this food? So what can I reduce here? So I would keep the canned beans, maybe buy a low sodium version, and decrease the chips a little bit. So what can be omitted? Can there be a reasonable substitute? So say you're looking at salad dressings, for example. Again, salad dressings are something that we could make at home if we wanted to, but is also, we can definitely purchase. So looking at the food label to see, can I get a lower sodium salad dressing that I still like? Cook at home more is another tip, and reduce salt in recipes by half. So say you're making something like macaroni and cheese, it calls for half a teaspoon of salt. Could you, the cheese has sodium, could you reduce the sodium in there, maybe add a little bit of something flavorful like paprika to give it some fun without the salt? Reading food labels is a great idea in comparing products in the grocery store. Salad dressing was a good example of that, where I need salad dressing, I want to eat salad, can I find a lower sodium option? And then ask for modifications in restaurants if you're eating out several times per week. So say you're eating out once a week, it's okay, don't waste your time asking them to hold this or side that or whatever. But say you have to eat several meals out in a week, maybe thinking about, are there a couple things we could do? Maybe asking if something could be cooked without salt, getting things that are, more in their true form. So instead of a mashed potato, thinking of a baked potato, less chances for them to add salt to it. Could I get dressings on the side? Could I get less cheese or less sauce, which is a good sodium source? All right, enough about sodium. So now I want to include a little bit of information about just general healthy eating, because it's a question that comes up as well. So I included information from the dietary guidelines, which are published every 5 years. These are kind of core elements of a healthy eating pattern. So an eating pattern is, the way we eat, a pattern of eating. I try to use that word instead of diet as much as possible, but I still, fail to do it sometimes. But eating pattern just sounds more positive than diet, so I try to do that. So these are 6 things that they are kind of recommending to do to follow a healthy eating pattern. So top is vegetables of all types. Dark green, which we know are calcium sources, red, orange, beans, peas, lentils. Starchy vegetables like potatoes and corn, those are vegetables too. Fruits, especially whole fruit if possible. Grains, at least half of which could be whole grains, so picking whole wheat bread, whole wheat tortillas if you want, brown rice. Dairy, including milk, yogurt, cheese. This includes plant-based options. Our diet should also include some protein foods, and it can be anything from lean meats and poultry and eggs and seafood to some plant-based items like tofu, beans, peas, lentils, soy, other soy products. And then oils, healthy oils, including vegetable oils, always found in food like seafood and nuts. So these are, if we're thinking about, things that we should include in one day, if we can grab all these things, it would be great. So this is a little bit more about healthy eating patterns. So the dietary guidelines usually kind of highlight several, and I know these say this, Mediterranean diet, but the dietary guidelines typically highlight some of the evidence-based eating patterns, and those are the Mediterranean diet, which could be, is focused on vegetables, plant-based foods, seafood, limiting high-fat foods, and sweets. And then the DASH eating diet, which stands for dietary approaches to stop hypertension. And so it benefits blood pressure, it can lower bad cholesterol, and it really aligns a lot with the Mediterranean diet as well. And then plant-based eating patterns. So that could be anything from lacto-ovo vegetarian, someone that would include eggs, to someone, and milk, to someone that would include, none of those products and would be a vegan. So all of them have benefits. This does not mean you need to overhaul your diet completely and 100% align with all, either of these or any of these. You can start, kind of setting goals that would align with this. So for example, both things, at the top of the Mediterranean diet and DASH are vegetables and fruit and produce. So maybe starting there. Maybe thinking about one meatless meal or one meatless day if you're trying to reduce animal protein. All right. Okay, so some other general healthy eating notes from me, just kind of based on the dietary guidelines, my experience, and then some of these eating patterns. So increasing nutrient-dense foods. So nutrient-dense foods are foods that provide us with vitamins, minerals, fiber that promote health. They have little added sugar, saturated fat, which is animal fat, and sodium. So these foods could be vegetables, fruits, whole grains, lentils, eggs, lean protein. And they're foods with little added sugar or added fat. So these are nutrient-dense foods. And then decreasing empty calories. So empty calories are foods that give us calories without benefit. So examples could be like soda, or my favorite chips, or pizza, or snacky foods, things that may sometimes bring us joy but not necessarily bring us nutrients. And that's where my next tip is, the 90-10 rule. So thinking about 90% of the time we're eating these nutrient-dense foods that that are good for us, that we also enjoy, and then 10% of the time it's someone's birthday or celebration, or it's a busy day, and you may end up eating more processed foods or more indulgent foods than you typically eat. And then I always want to remind people to avoid eating patterns that encourage avoidance of the whole food group or types of foods, unless they don't tolerate them. So, we don't want to omit all of our carbohydrates or all of our fat. That wouldn't be good. We need carbohydrates for energy. We need fat for satiety and hormones. And so all foods are important in our body. And if we can tolerate them, we should eat them all. Okay. So then I've got some common themes based on dietary guidelines, healthy eating, and then my experience. Produce is important. So fruits, vegetables, these are important foods. If you can make one change with your diet, aside from making sure you're getting enough calcium, thinking about trying to get more produce is a good first, that's where I would start. And then they all focus on fiber. So fiber is in whole grains and produce. It helps us stay full. It can reduce risk of chronic disease. So fiber is important as well. And in general, we don't get as much fiber as we probably should. And then lean protein is encouraged, mostly if we can at every meal. This could be animal sources or plant sources, so anything from chicken to tofu to beans to, lean cuts of beef. Protein is important. It keeps us full, and it helps maintain our muscle mass. And then empty calories are limited, so things with added sugar, fat, high sodium foods, as much as we can be careful of those, 10% of the time type foods, that would be a great thing. So since my number one tip was increasing fruits and vegetables, I'll go through about seven things I recommend to do. So start with what you like. You don't have to eat anything you don't like. That's the number one rule about nutrition. Don't have to eat anything you don't like. So start with a vegetable you like. Try to increase that more in your diet. Find new ways to make it. Or fruit. Say you don't even like vegetables and you want to start with fruit. That's fine. Try a new vegetable when eating out. So say you don't want to purchase it and cut it and do it at home, but if there's something interesting, try it when you're eating out. Consider doubling the vegetable portions and recipes. So if a soup calls for a vegetable that you do like and you want to double it, go for it. Cut up vegetables in one batch. So say you go to the grocery store, you buy a bunch of fresh vegetables, and you want to cut them all up in one day. It can be faster a lot of times than trying to hack at them throughout the week. If it's within budget, you could also consider buying pre-cut ones. That's just fine too. Frozen are just as good as fresh, and I would even say I would leave canned in there too. Any way you can get a vegetable, if it's canned, fresh, or frozen, I love it. Blend vegetables into sauces, so this could be, taking pasta sauce and putting some squash in there, extra tomatoes, onions, or spinach, and then add beans to anything and pretty much everything. Beans can go with all foods, so those are my vegetable tips. All right. A little bit about physical activity, because this comes up as well and is important. There's something called the Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans. It's in second edition. And I've included some tips from them as well. So they're recommending at least 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic exercise a week, which could be like walking, biking, exercise classes, and then 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise. So these are their recommendations, but they do note that any exercise is of benefit. So say you want to do 20 minutes a week. That is just fine. It's not 150, but it's not 0. So they're okay with that. So getting out there, doing whatever you can. Muscle strengthening exercises are also of importance. So I get asked a lot of times, how can I improve my metabolism? Improving your muscle mass is the only way to improve metabolism. So the stronger you are, the more calories you burn at rest. So getting involved in some sort of strength exercises that you can do a couple of days a week is a great idea, where you're working major muscle groups like your arms or legs or your core and back. So kind of the 4 tips that I have based on this are: start with an activity you enjoy and can do without discomfort. So like walking or swimming if you like to swim. Just like eating, you do not have to do an activity that you don't like. And then increase is tolerated. So say you start with 15 minutes after a lunch or something and you want to increase it to 20. You always want to kind of challenge your body with exercise. And then try to be consistent. So say 15 minutes is all you've got, but you're going to consistently commit to that a few times a week. Just start with making a habit to move. And then consider free options, whether that's YouTube or free classes at work, classes within the community, parks, walking trails, rec centers, that sort of thing. Shouldn't have to pay a ton of money for physical activity if we don't have to. Things are expensive enough. Okay, so physical activity for adults, 2 questions we sometimes get are, what if I have pain with exercise? That can be very common. So consider a low impact exercise like swimming, a stationary bike, maybe yoga, maybe some stretching, and kind of increase as tolerated. There is some sort of discomfort that comes with exercise, and I think, thinking about discomfort versus pain, so, if I'm lifting some heavy weights, that's uncomfortable, but it's not painful. So if it's pain, I think there's a line between pain and discomfort. And then consider seated strength exercises. So there's lots of free YouTube videos out there for seated low impact exercises. So starting there, strengthening your arms, strengthening your core in your seat is a great idea. And then if you have a doctor that could, write for a PT referral, if that's something that they're able to do. And then how does exercise impact our calcium levels? So we have research in individuals without HypoPARA that are doing very strenuous, intense exercise like marathon running, and that impacts calcium. In general, the recommendation of 150 minutes a week will probably just be fine. It would probably not lower calcium levels. But if you have symptoms while exercising, discuss this with your physician as well. All right. Okay, so then the next 3 slides are some sample meal plans that I came up with that are kind of include a breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack. They're about 2,000 calories. You can add seasonings and dressings as desired. And this one has about 1,000 milligrams. So this was a brainstorm of something I created. So breakfast, we're starting the day strong with some eggs and cheese, maybe some vegetables added in there, maybe a piece of fruit for fiber and carbohydrate, and then some calcium-fortified orange juice. So that brings us to about 400. So we've got that done at breakfast. And then lunch, could be a pita, hummus, tomatoes, kale, fat-free cottage cheese. So that's a little bit lower, 250. And then you're going to do a snack, maybe some yogurt with some berries. I picked 2% fat yogurt, but it could be skim, it could be whole milk. It could be a cup of milk if you didn't want to drink or want to eat yogurt. And then dinner is a little bit lower with salmon, potatoes, and then the calcium mostly coming from broccoli. So this gives us about 1,000 milligrams. Again, this is just, an example. No one has to definitely eat this way, but it was a good guide, I thought. All right, so then we've got, say, a non-dairy option or a vegan option. So this is all plant-based. So this is, again, breakfast, lunch, dinner. Breakfast is gonna maybe start with a cup of soy milk or other plant-based milk that you like. Some whole grain cereal that's usually fortified with calcium, some chopped walnuts, and a cup of mixed fruit. And then lunch is a little bit lower calcium. So this, and this may not be enough food for somebody. They may want to adjust it. So mixed greens, roasted chickpeas, other chopped vegetables, a preferred salad dressing. So it's kind of a light lunch, actually. Because then we're gonna need a snack after that light lunch. So almonds, dried fruit, some chocolate chips to kind of make a homemade trail mix. And then dinner, most of our calcium is coming from this bok choy and tofu. And so you'd make kind of a stir fry, tofu, brown rice, stir fry vegetables, including bok choy, and then whatever sauces. So this is about 1,000 to 1,100 milligrams. It's a little bit lower protein. So say you're an individual following a plant-based diet, you want to make sure you're getting enough protein. You may need to do a protein drink or increase the chickpeas, increase the tofu to get enough protein. All right, and then my last one is a takeout day. So say you're traveling or you have a busy day and you're gonna eat all your meals out. So this meal is this day is kind of fueled by cheese. So if you don't like cheese, we're gonna have to think about something else. Maybe you grab a calcium fortified orange juice to make sure you're getting enough. So again, cheesy day. So we've got egg sandwich that has cheese. English muffin and an apple. That's something that Starbucks or McDonald's or anybody can have. And then a takeout salad with maybe it has chicken, cheese, vegetables, and some salad dressing, and it's about 4 cups. So that's usually kind of a hearty bowl. And then snack, maybe you're having a granola bar and then a latte. So that's not cheese, but it's dairy. And then at dinner, you're at a Mexican restaurant. You're gonna have some beef enchiladas, rice and beans, and a side salad. So this is, a little over 2,000 calories, a little bit higher calcium. And the day's kind of low in fruits and vegetables, honestly. So sometimes, there's 2 salads, I guess, and a fruit. So maybe it's not. But sometimes this just shows, some days are lower fruits and vegetables, some days are higher, and you could eat any of these days. All right, I'm definitely gonna have enough time for a lot of questions. So, my closing thoughts is that change, whether it's diet, addressing issues with HypoPARA or general healthy eating patterns or exercise, change can be overwhelming. So thinking about, not overhauling everything overnight, picking 1 or 2 things to work on at a time. And maybe that's calcium, or maybe that's vegetables, or maybe that's exercise. And, really honing in on those habits for a few weeks, making sure they're becoming habits and that they're not too hard, and then moving on to something else so that you're not picking things, that they're unattainable or that are too much at once. And then thinking about priorities. So, I went over a bunch of things, and what's a priority for somebody is maybe not a priority for other people. So really thinking about what is something that is a priority for your life. All right. And then I think I've got 15 minutes for questions, which was great. These are some resources. Oops, sorry. The ODS, so Office of Dietary Supplements is an NIH group, and they have fact sheets about all sorts of nutrients, including calcium, so that is a great one. The Dietary Guidelines Calcium Fact Sheet, the Dietary Guidelines in general, that has a lot of information about general healthy eating. MyPlate.gov, which is a website that can, I don't even have a picture of it, I should. But the idea is to fill half your plate with produce, a quarter of the plate with grains, and a quarter of the plate with protein, and the information from the Mediterranean diet and DASH diets. So, all right, now we've got questions.
Now we're ready for questions.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
What a great
thank you, guys.
presentation.
Thank you.
You know, I think it's so important that we really pay attention to this so that we can partner our supplements. We know as HypoPARA patients, we're not going to be able to get everything through our diet. We have to have our supplements as well. But man, it can really partner. I recently went a little bit low myself, and I was actually starting to have some symptoms. And I was like, damn, I don't want to take another calcium. So I was like, let me figure this out. I got cottage cheese, I got almond milk, I got ravioli for dinner. And I tell you, I was at 8.3, and within a couple days, I was back to 9.2, and I was feeling great. And I didn't have to take extra calcium. So it's a partnership and understanding what your body knows. And sometimes, you know, it might not be a cheesy day or a cheesy week, and you go, oh my gosh, I haven't had cheese all in a month. So really paying attention sometimes to our diet when we're having those ebbs and flows that go through us will help. I loved also where you talked about, like, add more of what you like. Like, right? If it's good for you and you like it, add more, because that'll really help as well. And then, of course, the old exercise for some people that don't like exercise, and find one little thing that you do like and just add a little bit more to that. So that can really help as well. So let's take some questions from the audience, and we'll go with Bob first, and then we'll go to Michelle.
Hello. I was just going to ask if there's any foods specific to hypoparathyroidism that we should avoid. I know that I saw a few years back that something, I forgot the reasoning, I don't even know if it's true, but cauliflower is better to avoid, but I was going to see what you thought of that.
Yeah, great question. And we get this too. And I think it's very individual. So, you know, say you're having a lot of urinary calcium losses, maybe high sodium, or if your phosphorus levels are high, maybe, you know, decreasing the phos. But there's no like one food that you would need to avoid. Sometimes oxalates are something that you will read about that to be careful of. And it's more so not necessarily not having them, but maybe not having them, you know, a lot of them in one day. I don't know, cauliflower off the top of my head, I don't know if it's high in oxalate. So I don't know where that one maybe came from. But you're good with cauliflower, that's for sure. And there's no like one food that people need to avoid. Great question.
All right, Dr. Manson?
Yeah, Megan, thank you for the excellent practical advice. Can you drill down a little more on the question of phosphate and dairy? So I often find myself encouraging dairy, as you do, but then I also know that there's a lot of phosphate in there, which we typically want to avoid in hypoparathyroidism. And then we kind of find a middle ground, take dairy, but not too much.
Yes.
And, so tell me what you think about it.
And it's hard because, you know, in nutrition, whether it's about phosphorus or sugar or whatever, we always say this word moderation, like eat it in moderation. But what does that actually look like? So I think knowing actual levels in the blood of phosphorus can be helpful. And so say phosphorus levels are high, you're consuming 3 dairy products a day, maybe subbing for one of the, if you're comfortable with it, subbing for a plant-based milk that's not fortified with dairy. Not fortified, doesn't have any added phosphorus. So soy milk and almond milk are 2 milks that can work. And then maybe doing a little bit more of the other plant-based calcium sources like nuts, greens. And we know these aren't going to add up to robust numbers. And so maybe if it's a balance of cutting down on dairy foods altogether and increasing a supplement. And that's like a conversation that I feel like is super individualized, where you've done all you can with your diet, you've cut down to maybe one animal dairy product a day, you've been careful with your phosphorus portions, you've looked for other phosphorus sources outside of the very important calcium sources, and then maybe it's a supplement thing where you need to increase the supplemental calcium a little bit more, which is an unfortunate answer because we want to, I know it's overwhelming to take all these supplements, so.
All right, Michelle?
I have one online that is asking, do you have any recommendations on how to find a dietitian, specifically maybe a pediatric dietitian, and how do you make sure that they understand HypoPARA?
That is such a good question. So there's a website called eatright.org, and it is going to, on that website, I think in one of the top corners, it'll say find a dietitian. And so you can search by your zip code and find a dietitian. So that'll give you a list. And then it may take a little bit of digging on their websites, if they have websites, giving them a call to make sure they understand HypoPARA. Another place to start is with your physician, maybe an endocrinologist or primary care physician, and seeing if they've referred to different dietitians.
On the second part of that question, she was asking about pediatric. Does it matter if they're
pediatric,
pediatric? Do you guys specialize like that?
We do a little bit, yeah. Usually if starting at, if there's a local like children's hospital or something, that could be a good place to start for a pediatric dietitian, and seeing what kind of clinics they have there could be a good idea for pediatric. I forgot to address that one. So eatright.org, pediatric dietitian, it may be a local pediatric hospital, asking a primary care or endocrinologist as well, especially if they're a peds endocrinologist. Peds endocrinologists work really closely with dietitians a lot of times, so that can be a good place to start.
All right, we have a question back there.
Hi, Bill from Baltimore. I'm a caregiver. First, thank you for holding this immediately after lunch, because the deli meat was delicious, and I would have not done it otherwise. Quick follow-up to the doctor's question regarding foods that are high calcium, low phosphorus, and low sodium. Is there any sort of a helpful Venn diagram of sorts that shows relationships between different foods?
Right.
Something that we could all find and use as a helpful guide.
Yeah.
And the second question, which is not related at all, is there's been a trend towards intermittent fasting as a dietary method. Has there been any research into how that, coupled with hypoparathyroidism, could interact?
Yeah, these are great questions. So for the high calcium, low phos, low sodium, a lot of kidney diets are focused that way. And so resources from NIDDK that are focused on kidney health could be a good resource there. But as far as like an actual diagram I have of foods that are high calcium, low phos, low sodium, let me think. Like the green leafy vegetables are one, but they're kind of low, and they're not super high in calcium, but they're still a source. Plant-based milks would be, if someone is up for plant-based milks, that would be a good way to go, because even tofu is going to have some phosphorus in it too. So, but I would start with, I'm trying to think of NIDDK is a good place to start for kidney, kind of a kidney-focused diet, because that's kind of the low phosphorus and sodium. And then your question about intermittent fasting. So there's a lot of studies about intermittent fasting, nothing specific to intermittent fasting and HypoPARA. What I would think is that it would be hard to spread your calcium throughout the day from food if you have an eating window that is narrow, like 8 hours or something like that. So we all fast overnight, and a lot of times the 12-hour fast is of benefit, and we don't all need to do intermittent fasting. And at least in my understanding and what I've read, is that some people seem to really do well with it, and their bodies like it, and some people don't. And I would think HypoPARA is one where, if you're trying to get 300 milligrams of calcium spread throughout the day, intermittent fasting may not be the correct diet. But if you can, or if you wanted to include like a plant-based milk is a breakfast, like in a coffee, but not necessarily have it be a meal. That could be a strategy for trialing intermittent fasting. Always recommend to, if there's something you read about that you're interested in trying and it seems safe, so intermittent fasting could be one of those things. And the time-restricted eating is what I'm really more talking about, where you would have an eating window of 8 hours, not necessarily every other day fasting. I would think every other day fasting or a few fastings a week or something would not be something I'd recommend in HypoPARA.
Okay. Bob?
Yeah, Lynn Kohlmeyer, thank you so much. I tend not to trust slow-release calcium in my HypoPARA patients. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, especially if they're not on parathyroid hormone replacement?
You said the slow release
Slow
calcium?
release, I just don't trust it. Should I?
This is a great question, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer it. Now, while I do have a great experience with hypoparathyroidism patients at NIH, I don't necessarily get to follow up with them closely after supplement recommendations are made. So I'm sorry, I don't feel like I can answer the slow release one. I'm sorry. It might be a better question for somebody that gets to follow people more closely.
Yeah, one more, Bob.
Hi, I didn't hear you talk much about eggs, and I wonder if eggs are a source of calcium, if you can have too many eggs and that can give you too much calcium. And also, you mentioned the sodium, too much sodium will end up with high urinary calcium, but will it also result in high blood serum calcium? And if you have any suggestions for lowering your sodium beyond eating a lot of chips.
I know, so sorry. So eggs are not a great source of calcium, but they go well with cheese, which is a good source of calcium. So I do like eggs. Eggs are a great protein source, and so they're important for muscle mass. As far as the egg limit, I feel like in the past 20 years we've gone kind of eggs are good, eggs are bad, eggs are whatever. The egg yolk contains saturated fat. That is considered an unhealthy fat, but egg yolks also come with a lot of vitamins and minerals. So I like egg yolks actually, and so I like to think about how many egg yolks are you eating a week? Are you eating 10 egg yolks a week and you're also eating sausage and you're also eating bacon and other high saturated fat foods? Maybe you need to be careful of that. But if you're more so a pretty low lean protein eater, egg yolks could be just fine. If you are worried about, you say your cholesterol's been a little bit high and you want it to be mindful, you could do, buy a carton of egg whites, buy a container of full real eggs, and kind of mix them together if making a scrambled egg. So I love eggs. Not a source of calcium. And then your sodium question. So sodium is hidden in a lot of processed foods. So salad dressings, cheese, lunch meats, anything that comes in a package can be at risk for having sodium added to it. So just checking food labels. As far as sodium, high sodium diets making calcium levels in the blood high, I don't think that usually happens. It's more so the sodium is bringing calcium with it out of your urine. And so that's something more individual where you're, if you're doing a 24-hour urine and your physician knows that high sodium and high calcium levels losses through your urine, they would maybe recommend to tighten up how much sodium you're getting, so reducing added salt, reading food labels, maybe eating out less, or all ways to address sodium.
Okay, we're out of time, but thank you so much,
Thank you,
Megan,
guys.
for a great
This was great.
presentation.
Thank you so much.